Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode in our Fireside Chat series. We are joined today by Tommaso, who is a really dear friend. He is a PhD candidate at Imperial College in London and has done some really cool research in a few different domains. So, studies 5-MeO DMT, but also studies couples, relationships, sex, intimacy, and kind of a variety of different psychedelics. So, we're really excited to have him join us today. And of course, Kayla is here with us, my co founder at Enamory. So, we're going to just jump in. And Tommaso, it would be wonderful if you could just kind of share with our listeners a little bit of kind of the groundwork of the research that you've done with couples. I know you've done survey data and you've also collected data from retreats. So
Yeah,
just a little
yeah.
bit about kind of the setting and the couples that you have collected data from.
Like the beginning, like the the very beginning of like this interest in the couples and psychedelic work, it's it's coming from a paper that we published a couple of years ago that was around psychedelics and sexual functioning. It's basically showing the impact of psychedelic experiences in retreat settings, but also like of psilocybin therapy for depression of different aspects of sexuality. And that was the beginning that combined like retreat data with clinical data, and we will dive into it later, I think. But like we found overall positive effects on sexual functioning in people post-acutely, so not when they were under the influence of the drug, but in the weeks after the experience. And after that, we then moved into understanding more the effects of shared psychedelic experiences in romantic partners. So, like, how can this impact intimacy and feelings of interconnectedness when people are taking these substances together? This research is still like mainly like observational on survey data, so there is no control clinical studies that are like actively running on this topic specifically, and it's kind of like still in the exploratory domain.
And yeah, we can get into kind of all the details of what you found. Just for our listeners, this is really, really exciting because about half of couples who are coming to couple therapy are reporting some sort of distress in their sexual relationship, some sort of disconnection. And typically, this isn't due to something mechanical, something like erectile dysfunction. Sometimes it is, but often it's due to differences in desire or lack of desire. And we see sexual challenges in couples when there's challenges in the relationship. Often they kind of show up through the sexual dynamics. And we have some treatments for sexual disconnection. And often they can feel kind of prescriptive, and couples don't love them all the time. And so having different paths to reconnect sexually or intimately in your relationship is really exciting and really promising for our couples that are feeling disconnected. So what did couples report? What were some of the exciting things that couples were reporting?
Yeah, like the individual data, they were the ones on sex, so we didn't like investigate like the effects on sexuality on couples, unfortunately, but it was just on like single participants like participating in these ceremonies. Like I would have loved to collect the data from the partners, but back then we didn't think about it because it was not the primary scope. But we found improvements in sexual pleasure and the capacity to communicate sexual desires to one partners, in satisfaction with their own bodies, and Also, people reported to have seen like sex more as a spiritual experience and to be more open to try new things in their sex life after this big psychedelic experiences. And I think it might be related to like secondary effects, for example, and like mindfulness that we know that is one of the main treatment that people are like prescribed when they are suffering from sexual dysfunction, psychological sexual dysfunction. Another one can just be around like perceived in like connectedness with one's partner, that could also like intensify the feelings of attractiveness. It's still like an open question. We did investigate it really deeply in that study, and that's kind of like the interest in what we are developing now and trying to understand why this could have happened.
Yeah, so Tommaso's starting to talk about kind of like these mechanisms, and there's not like data on the mechanisms, but we can kind of think about that together. And Kayla, you may have some thoughts about this. So
And
we're seeing these changes after the psychedelic experience, and why after doing a psychedelic, either on your own or with your partner. I know you mentioned kind of mindfulness, or there may be that kind of increase in attractiveness. What is it about psychedelics that may be kind of shifting this perception?
yeah, that's. Do you have any guess? Like, I'm curious because it's such like an
Yeah.
unexplored setting that like you girls have been working with this like in with patients, and I think like we are at this stage in which like clinicians know much more because they've seen it, and research is not there yet, and it's such a slow process. And I personally, I'm not sure, and I think like maybe like yeah, you can make better guesses than the one that I can make. I think at this point.
First of all, that's like I love that answer, Tommaso, because I one of my complaints about hearing folks who are neuroscientists or who are other basic science researchers who work in the psychedelic space, they'll often, I think, take a few steps to translate their work into sort of more clinical application and implication without having like appropriate training and being a therapist. And sometimes I'm like, that's not actually how therapy works. So anyway, I love your perspective on this. I have deep, deep respect for the neuroscientists and basic science researchers. We would know nothing without them, but I think we should all respect each other's expertise. So I was really, I think, struck by what you had mentioned about they're able to maybe be more in touch with what they want and communicate that to their partners. I think one of the major barriers that we see in couples where there is sort of a psychological sexual dysfunction is shame and is sort of a lack of connection to our own sexuality, which has a lot to do with, I'm speaking from the perspective of somebody who lives and practices in the US, but a lot of our sort of cultural norms around sex and talking about sex are very deeply sex negative, right? And a lot of folks grow up with profound shame about their own sexual desires and sexuality, as well as a real lack of healthy modeling about what it looks like to discuss sex with a partner openly and in a sort of non-judgmental way. And I think what we see from sort of other impacts of psychedelics on people is that sometimes they really do help us confront and move through our own shame in a lot of different ways, and they help us see things from broader perspectives and kind of get out of our own way. And I wonder to what extent that's kind of what's going on here.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
interesting.
you're talking about, it seems like there's like the individual factors that can come up, and then the relational factors. So and obviously they can be mixed, but it seems like, Kayla, you're talking about the individual factors around like what are my own beliefs about sex, and where do I think I'm whatever, not good enough or bad or wrong for desiring this kind of sex. So psychedelics may create more acceptance and openness and self love, allowing to actually be able to communicate that to a partner and start to figure out how you can have satisfying sex that is in line with what you desire. And then I think with couples that are like coming into couple therapy, when there's been relational pain, that always shows up in the sexual
Mm-hmm.
connection. So when there's been any sort of like meanness or dismissing or things that are even outside of the control of the relationship, loss, right? If we're not able to actually communicate about that, any sort of disconnect in the couple emotionally is going to 90% of the time show up in the sexual relationship. And so I think psychedelics also, I mean, we've talked about this a lot in different spaces, but like part of that, like ego dissolution and not seeing yourself fully as separate and being able to come together in a different way and have forgiveness and
Yeah.
being able to go through all of those different processes with each other, I think will
But also
shift the
like,
sexual
and
connection.
I'm curious, like, I don't want to like diverge the topic too much, but I'm curious of this perspective on that you two might have, because I've been like thinking about this a lot in general about like couples and sexuality. And I had a conversation like a couple of months ago in LA with Emily from Sex with Emily that kind of like stuck with me, because I asked her like, you work with so many different people, what do you think is the percentage of couples that have like good sex over a very long term relationship? And she was like, I think that like there are these statistics that said like 50% of marriages end in divorce. And then she said, well, and I think in the ones that stay together, I think like 20% they declare like they're probably subjectively happy together. And she said of that 20%, I think around 5-10% they continue to have sustaining sex that over time, which is such a small proportion in a way. Like it's and that's kind of like made me think, oh, okay, like this like is this a problem, is this something that is just like a consequence of just like over familiarity? And then the other question that I have is that if let's say like someone that is like really like sex, let's say like your like subjective interest on sex, like, and the importance that you give it to it is like a 9 out of 10, you might like subjectively select partners where like you know that sex is really good. But like a lot of people, like they might not select partners because of sex. Like they might think, oh, like sex is okay, but this person is emotionally available, is present, treats me well, and then I'm gonna enter in a long-term romantic relationship with this person. And then like 5 years passes, and then like sex that started as a 7 and might end up like not being that subjectively rewarding, and then people don't want it anymore and they get pleasure from other aspects in life, and this creates problems. But I'm always thinking like, can you even do anything for that, or it's just because at the beginning you haven't really prioritized it? And at the same time, like it's not that you, yeah, like you can even hyper prioritize sex to compare to other aspects of the romantic relationships, and just finding someone that satisfies it all, it's hard. I don't know. I'm curious.
Yeah.
I brought a lot of information, and you two are clinicians, and
Yeah.
I'm curious of what you think about it.
Yeah, it's definitely true that different people place very different subjective importance on sex and on like a sexual connection when choosing partners. And I think that's valid. I think like some people, for some people, that is a really fundamental, important part of the relationship connection that they feel. And for others, it's less so. And I think that's okay if people are aligned on that, you know? And I think regardless of where you start, change throughout the lifespan is inevitable. This is maybe one of the biggest things that I find myself discussing with couples who are kind of working to sustain their relationship over the long term, is that you have to be able to accommodate within the relationship structure that you are both going to change as individuals, and the way that your connection is going to feel is going to change. And if you can't accommodate that, then a relationship has a really hard time lasting over a lifespan, right? Because people don't stay the same. And so whatever your sexual connection starts off as, it is going to change. Right? Your body is going to change, your hormones are going to change, the familiarity that you have with one another is going to change. And that doesn't necessarily mean, I think, get worse. I think it means change. And I think we can adapt and accommodate that in a number of different ways. And maybe the sexual connection, looks less like sort of that like spontaneous desire, like chemistry that maybe we have early on in a relationship, and maybe it looks more like something a little bit deeper, or more like something that explores different kinds of interests or kinks or something like that over, as it sort of matures and develops. Who knows? I think there's a lot of different
Yeah.
ways for that to look, but yeah, I think the relationship between where does our sex life start and how does that shift over the lifespan, I think is a really interesting one that I'm not sure that we have like a ton of great data on.
I think this also comes back to something that we were talking about with just like how our culture, or many cultures, talk about sex. And we don't really talk about what sex looks like in a long term relationship. And what's shown on TV and in movies is like new relationship energy. And I think people often expect sex to be easy and spontaneous, and that is not what sex is like in a long-term relationship. And so then once it starts to be something that you have to actually put effort toward and planning, then it becomes more like a burden, and people are like, well, if there's any sort of challenge around this, then I like whatever, it's
Yeah.
not worth it. And then also when there is pain in a relationship, that impacts sexual connection. And so then there's like another hurdle. I'm working with a non-monogamous individual right now. They're getting couple therapy from someone else, and they don't have sex in their primary relationship right now. They have sexual relationships with other people. And part of that challenge is like sex in other relationships is really easy, and there's not the
Yeah.
same level of vulnerability or logistical challenge. They don't have children. And so having exciting, novel, easy sex, like that's great. And I think like they would like to have a sexual relationship with each other, but it has been easier to not have to navigate the challenge of creating that, and they're sexually satisfied in other places. And it was interesting in one of our recent sessions, we were talking about like, is they talk with each other about sex with other people, but she said if they were having sex, those conversations would actually feel really hard. And so there's also this like protective thing
Mhm.
happening around like, I don't have to compare myself to that other person because we're not having a sexual relationship. And so there's all these complicating
Yeah.
factors. And I think that in monogamous relationships, they just have sexless relationships, right?
Yeah.
Because like all these complicating factors are too much to navigate. And so they're like, whatever, I'll just play hockey and go rock climbing and like get my thrills that way, and we'll like cook dinner together. But I don't think it's because people don't, most people, I don't think it's because they don't want to be having sex. I think it's that they don't know how to have these conversations. They don't know how to have a different kind of sex in a long term relationship. And then, like, people cheat, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like 70% of people cheat at some point in their life, and 30% of people cheat in their marriages. Like, it's high.
Yeah.
So people
Yeah.
are wanting to have sex. They're just wanting to have sex that is easy and not complicated, and what is shown on the movies.
Yeah, yeah. And I like it's yeah, it's such an this such an interesting one. Kind of like even like coming from like relatively conservative country like Italy. Like I've had conversations with friends when they're like kind of like somehow self-justifying cheating because the open relationships thing it's so outside of the normal conversations, and then they can't even tolerate the idea of like their girlfriend like yeah being with someone, and then it's just kind of like okay like this is just easier to like reduce complicances, and then it is until it isn't, because then if something finds out then the entire relationship gets destroyed. And but yeah, like it's like most people don't really know how to navigate these things, and I think we are just at the very early beginning to publicly discussing them.
Yeah,
And I think that
and
that's actually an amazing place where psychedelics can come into play. Like some of my friends that I've known for 20 years who actually have really healthy relationships and have had sexual relationships throughout their relationship psychedelics are part of their relationship. And psychedelics create novel, and we'll get into this, shared experiences where you're going into this place of depth and exploration and you're doing it together. And like it's continually creating, I mean, you can also do this with like traveling or new experiences in general, but you have to have that planning and commitment to having a shared experience together.
Yeah. I think the novelty is a really important component here too that we haven't talked about yet. Esther Perel writes a lot about this, right? That in long-term relationships, we lose that sort of novel excitement that drives a lot of our sexual interest early on. I know that I have come to understand my person or myself as a person who's very like attracted to novelty up to a point, right? And so like that I mean, that's fundamentally like not the same thing as a long-term stable relationship, which have their own sources of beauty and joy, right, and wonder to them. And psychedelics are a way of introducing novelty, right, in a relationship that
Yeah.
is otherwise like very familiar. And so I think a lot of people get a lot of benefit out of that. Not to mention like not only novelty in the sense of like, I mean, you take some mushrooms and you have a brand new sensory experience, right? But also in the sense that like novelty in discovery of ourselves and our partners, right? Like new depths to us that we can then share with one another and new ways of understanding each other, even in very long-term relationships.
Yeah. Yeah. Psychedelics. I like remember when I did 5-MeO DMT, like I experienced emotions that I had never experienced before in my life. And so like being an adult and having an experience with a partner and then seeing or feeling or understanding things in a completely new way as if you're like a baby, like that is a life-changing experience and you get to do it with someone. And I think those experiences are intimate, right? Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
intimacy. And if
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
want, then that can shift how we're connecting sexually, intimately, sexually.
Yeah, no, and I was here, and have you done 5-MeO with your partner, or it was a separate thing that I didn't understand? You just mentioned like was
Yeah, I was with a partner.
okay, okay, and was it like did it have an intention to like deepen the connection? Was it like around working in that field?
The intention was not about the relationship, but we were in the same space.
Yeah,
And like he was holding me during the experience, so he was
okay.
very much part of my experience.
Yeah, no, I think like for sure, like they can like when done in that way, when your partner is integrated in that dynamic, they can definitely like deepen and like have a strong effect on the perceived intimacy. And this is like the shared reality thing that like we kind of hinting that is like the study that like Talia Cornelius from Columbia University like published together with me at the beginning of the year. That was just like a initial cross-sectional survey, but like we found out that like couples that are taking psychedelics together when they are in their like in their romantic relationship, they perceive like an increasing sense of shared reality with their partner. Like tripping together with that was associated with like feeling more on the same wavelength, and this was linked to like improvements in relationship satisfaction and like sexual satisfaction, commitment. While when partners were taking psychedelics outside of the relationship, when they were together with a person, this was like potentially associated with a higher likelihood of breaking up and lower relationship satisfaction. And this could be linked to this idea that like you're not evolving together with your partner, and potentially you're drifting in another direction.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
curious, what did you look at all different kinds of psychedelics? Where or were the couples that were filling out
Mhm.
the surveys was it all different kinds of psychedelics?
There was
Like
no MDMA in it.
psilocybin is going to
It
be
was
more of
psilocybin, LSD, and then like a minorities of other psychedelics, but it's mainly like mushrooms and LSD just because they are like the available ones.
Yeah, that's interesting to me for two reasons. One, I think like everybody knows that MDMA is good for couples, good for couples work, right? And it gets a lot of attention. That's that was one of its original uses, right, with the Shulgins who developed it. And also, other psychedelics can have profoundly beneficial impacts on couples and relationship functioning as well, for some similar reasons as MDMA, and some, I think, unique ones in terms of the
Yeah.
shared experience of reality, Tommaso, that you're talking about, this shared construction of reality, kind of getting on the same wavelength. We work with ketamine in our practice in the US. That's what we can work with legally outside of research studies. And when we say we work with ketamine in couples, the first reaction that we often get from folks is like, ketamine? And turns out it's actually a phenomenally heart opening, softening medicine to use with couples. And it's really wonderful to help folks get a little distance from the patterns that they're stuck in and get some flexibility and relate to one another differently. It can be really profound. And I think similarly, hearing you talking about the more classic psychedelics, right? If we're thinking LSD or psilocybin, there's a lot of potential for that sort of reality alignment there. I think the flip side of that, oops, sorry, I just whacked my microphone as I was gesturing wildly. The flip side of that is Chandra and I have thought a lot about how to partner with, and we've had a lot of conversations with folks who run the organizations that will send often U.S. military veterans, but all kinds of folks abroad to receive like ayahuasca or ibogaine treatment or something that's not legally available in the U.S. to address really long-standing PTSD and substance use and other kinds of concerns. And often what we see is that the families and partners of those people are really kind of left like out to sea a little bit. They don't really know what to make of this person who's having this outside psychedelic experience. And so we're really eager to explore ways of supporting partners and maybe integrating partners more in those experiences. And I'm thinking about this too in light of what you were just saying, Tommaso, about the importance of having that kind of shared connection around the experience.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And again, like, I mean, I've heard like, as you always do with psychedelics, like I heard like dream stories, but I heard so many horror stories, like linked to like shared use of MDMA and psychedelics in couples, like just from like maintenance of like abusive dynamics and coercion, and then like it's kind of moving into like complicated, even like just like more difficulties in breaking up, and like identity fusion that is too strong, or maybe like stuff comes up that people are not really ready to deal with. And I think like when we talk about the recreational use compared to the work that you girls are doing, that is much more contained and supported, the risks are like duplicating. Like it's much more of a gamble doing it with your partner there, and like the promise that like you're gonna do this and this is gonna increase the quality of your relationship without any kind of work done around it or support. I think it's a very naive thing to say, to think.
Yeah, I think that's something that is not talked about as much, or we don't talk about as much because obviously we're talking about a therapeutic space. But the experience of like doing psychedelics early in a relationship, I've heard this story a lot, that couples will like have a psychedelic experience early in their relationship and then like fall in love. They've had
Yeah.
this huge life-changing experience, and so there's commitment that is based on a psychedelic experience and not necessarily like knowing the person, because it is such a deep, vulnerable, often life-changing experience. So, yeah, maybe we can talk a little bit about that for listeners. Like,
Mhm.
when is a psychedelic experience potentially like harmful, or when do we like not
Yeah.
want to take away like a meaning that is so deep or life changing, versus like often we do encourage people to look into a psychedelic experience having deep meaning and making behavioral changes in their life based on a psychedelic experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there's, I think, like definitely like the time in which you're doing it like matters. Like doing it like, I mean, I think like a lot of early early love and desire is like highly driven by projection, by like ideas of what this person is gonna be, on how like your life is gonna be with them. Like there's an ideal love that is there, and it's what's driving the intense like romantic attraction that you experience with someone at the beginning. But you don't really know this person. You have an idea of who they
Yeah.
are in your mind, and then you're kind of like following that. And I think doing psychedelics at that stage of the relationship, like a lot of times it doesn't make you like knowing the other person better. It can just like deepen the projection, the illusion that you have of this person. And this can intensify the romantic dynamic a lot. But I think of it like more and more as a sort of like excessive use of like fertilizer on a plant that is growing. Like most of the times end up burning it instead of making the relationship better. And
Mm.
it's because it's like love. It's something that is like created on like foundations and like slowly over time, and it's not this like intense reaction that you feel that like strongly like just drives you to someone. Is a part of it, but it's at the beginning, and I don't think that's where psychedelics should be better placed in a way. And that's when like the likelihood
Yeah.
of like complex things emerging from it is much higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a
So
great
you're
metaphor.
more likely to be like building a relationship on your fantasy of the person rather than like who the person actually is. Do
Yeah.
you think that we should wait to do psychedelics with a partner until we're like out of the new relationship energy phase? If that lasts like 6 months to a year, do you think that people, or what are like cautions for people doing psychedelics in the new relationship energy phase?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Like I wish I had the answer to this one, because it's so like humans are so complicated. Like relationships are like just even more complicated. And like I remember
Mm-hmm.
like at the conference a couple of months ago, like where I gave a talk on like psychedelics and relationships, and I like get this man that tells me that like he like met like the love of his life in this like ayahuasca ceremony, and how like they instantly connected, and then like they did another one, and he proposed on her after the ceremony. And at the beginning they thought it was crazy, but then like they've been together for years now, and he was telling me like how they developed this deep beautiful love together, and like how psychedelics like basically made it grow, and without it it would have never happened. And then like just literally 2 hours after, like I talked with someone that was like severely traumatized by doing MDMA with their partners, and how like they were describing me how like they ended up trapped in this like very abusive dynamics for years, because they just saw that that was the only person they could feel those feelings for, because
Mm.
likely of like repeated experiences with like mind altering drugs that were done like throughout the relationship. And like which one it's saying that like which one is the truth? Like both are and none is, in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Both are and none are, right? Like psychedelics are neither a like silver bullet magical force here to save us all, and they're also not like a force of like hedonistic evil, right? Like they're an experience, just like many in life. And I think as we're talking about this, Chandra, it's I I feel like the way that we are conceptualizing the role of psychedelics early on in a relationship is the same way that we talk to people about new relationship energy, right? Which is like you're feeling a lot of feelings and the feelings are real, but that doesn't necessarily translate to decisions and behaviors and beliefs, right? That like you can have your head in the clouds and like feel all the feelings and enjoy the experiences, but you need to keep your feet on the ground. And generally speaking, we don't want anybody making major life altering decisions
Yeah.
within like 6 months to a year into a new relationship, because you can't trust the chemicals in your brain, right, to help you make a rational choice. And I think similarly for psychedelics, right, like you can take the experience for what it is and also acknowledge the limitations of what it is not, right? And we shouldn't necessarily just believe everything that we feel. We can feel everything that we feel, but that doesn't necessarily translate into what's true for us.
I
Yeah.
think, yeah, I think pulling from that, like new relationship energy and psychedelics are far more about you and the chemicals in your brain than they are about the person in front of you. So the fact that in new relationship energy, you're having this chemical response, it may be due to some pieces of aspects of attraction or the person in front of you. It may have to do with where you are at your life. It may have to do with your biology. It may have to do with kind of freedom that's opening up around you. You're accessing different parts of yourself, like whatever it is, it's something that's happening inside of you. And you're relating that to this person. It must be because of this person. It's way more because of you than this person. Same thing with psychedelics. So psychedelics are an experience that's happening inside of you. And if you're doing it with a person, I think it's very easy to say this magical experience happened because I was with this person or because I had it with this person. And so that it must be whatever, love or life-changing or commitment. But really, something magical is happening within you, right? It's your experience.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But and it's very hard to like distinguish the two because, of course, like it's been perceived by coming from the other person, but most of the times it's not. Like it's just like echoing something that has been inside you that is like a lot of times has to do with your childhood and like like parental dynamics, and then you kind of get attached to it and moving from that phase to the one where like you recognize the other person is like not the part of your illusion, is kind of like the complicated one.
I
Yeah.
think this is also like so much broader also than what we're talking about just for our listeners. Like people have very little power over you in general, and like things are often not other people's faults, and like we in many ways create our reality, and like we're in charge of the decisions that we make and the behaviors that we engage in. And so I think we often give a lot of power to things outside of us when it's usually something within us.
Yeah. I'm actually, Tommaso, I'm curious your take on this. I think so. As a to back up for context, as a therapist, like kind of like Chandra is saying here, like a lot of what we do is we help people. We help people learn that just because I feel something is true, just because I feel like something is true, it doesn't mean it is true, right? I might feel deep in my bones, right, that your behavior is because you secretly don't love me. That does not mean that it is actually true, right? And so we can distinguish between feeling something very deeply and it being true kind of in reality and in a more objective sense or from other perspectives. And so helping people shift that is often the basis of what we're working on in therapy. And it's been interesting sort of moving more into the psychedelics space because I hear a lot of folks talk often about like, well, the experiences that people have on psychedelics must be real. They must be true in an objective sense because people feel the like truthiness of it so profoundly on psychedelics. And I think like I want to caution people about that, right? To
Yeah,
say like just
yeah,
because we
100%.
feel that something feels so real and so true, that does not actually translate to the fact that it is. We know that we can stick an electrode in your brain and poke you certain places in the brain and produce a feeling that feels really real. That doesn't mean that it is. It means we're poking you in the brain with an electrode. So I'm curious, Tommaso, from your perspective, given your research that you do, and obviously your research is much broader than we've talked about so far, and on all kinds of psychedelics, including DMT. And I'm curious, you know, your take on how we should understand these really profound feeling experiences on psychedelics and what we should make of them.
Yeah, like it is a very relevant question because as you said, like also like given like the amount of like psychedelics underground use like that has been done via like non-licensed therapists and people that like they're not even shamans, so it's kind of like in the middle, like they're not trained like from like properly through Western modalities, but not even through properly through indigenous modalities, and so they're kind of like developing their own way of like looking at these experiences that a lot of times like lacks the nuance that like therapy like but even like shamanism has in interpreting like these type of experiences. And I think like a lot of times like you can get like false insights by like using psychedelics, especially when like you don't like have proper integration and you don't have anyone to like challenge the like meaning of what you might have lived. Like if you're people have like weird dreams all the times, like so many people have dreams that I don't know, like having sex with their dad or their mom, like at some point in their life. But it, like you might wake up, be like, oh fuck, that was so weird. But at the same time, it's not that you would think like that was actually something that happened in my life. While with psychedelic experiences, like if some like people like might have a psychedelic experience and then they suddenly have a vision of having sex with their parents and they're like, oh my god, like I was raped by my parents, and this like could lead you in such a deep rabbit hole that is actually not based on any proper reality. But like, how do you know this is not the case while while you are experiencing it in a way that feels so real? And I think the only way is like having like proper preparation and integration that allows you to like challenge what you lived. But in so many times this is not really accessible because people like it's an expensive process, and like therapists that are psychedelic friendly are not available yet. So you enter in this like rabbit hole of like false beliefs induced by psychedelics, and I think they're like it's becoming more and more prevalent, and it's a problem. And this extends from like something like the one that I described now, from other ones like going into like conspiracy theories or like new age religious like beliefs, they they can bring people so far from consensus reality without really finding the ground reality. And for whatever might happen in the depths of the psychedelic realms, like talking with DMT and 5-MeO, like I think there's like, if so many people went there and still they don't like really find a common ground and truths and spiritual beliefs that are coming from it, I think like it shows that the reality of these experiences is ineffable by definition. And the more you try to grasp on it, the more your mind will just like create narratives that like might end up being false. And it's just the reality of it. And like if someone like has such an experience and then they end up like having proper integration with someone that they know what they're talking about, they will be challenged, they will be prompted to work around it, and potentially to like explore it further if it's something that like they deeply believe is true, but not without like an hesitation and support in going into it. While a lot of the times like people go, they have an ayahuasca ceremonies in the jungle with maybe like not properly trained like Western shamans, and then they have this like mind shattering experiences, and they come back with like beliefs that they didn't even know they have, and like then they don't know what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah, we often, so if anyone out there does need to be connected with a therapist, we can help you find someone. So you can always reach out to us. And what Tommaso's talking about is so important. And we often talk with clients about this. Like, whatever happened during your psychedelic experience is meaningful to the extent that it matters in your life, and we'll figure that out together. It doesn't necessarily mean that what you saw or experienced is right truth, but it could mean something else for your life. You may want to make behavioral changes based on something that you saw or experienced. And it does matter, and it is real in the sense that you had a psychedelic experience and you saw what you saw and you felt what you felt, and it means something to you.
Yeah, no, totally. But that's like the only way you either like really develop like a mindset that allow you to like have these experiences, and I always like be very skeptical and be like, oh, like this is a new set of beliefs, new set of like thoughts that I'm having, but like looking at it, but then like questioning it once like you
Yeah.
are back in your sober state again. Otherwise it becomes like a very slippery territory to go in. And talking
Yeah.
about individual experiences, but like this can happen like even more strongly with your romantic partners, like the potential of just like projecting your own things on your romantic partner when you are under the
Hmm.
influence of psychedelics. I think it's potentially way higher, and people can develop a lot of like issues by just doing that. Be like, oh, I'm sure I've seen that, I'm sure I felt like his real feelings out of these experiences, but like that just might be your mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then with a partner, it's really important to integrate together because you're kind of decide if you have a life together, right? You're kind of deciding together, what does this mean and what do we want to bring into our day to day and what do we not? And so there's then two people and two people's experiences, or potentially more if you're doing it with more relationship partners.
And thinking about integrating together too, I'm also thinking like there might be times where you need to integrate separately. And that's sort of like if there's like a question of is the relationship sort of safe and trustworthy? Tommaso, you've mentioned a couple of times like the risk of sort of recapitulating abuse dynamics by way of psychedelics. And we get really concerned about that, obviously, in our work with psychedelics. And in a therapeutic setting, we have the benefit of being able to do a lot of screening so that we can be reasonably sure, right? As sure as therapists can be, that there's not a dynamic of coercion or control or something that's going to put people in an emotionally or psychologically unsafe space when they get vulnerable in this way with their partner, right? That it's safe for them to be open and vulnerable, and it's safe for them to form an attachment, and we can help them, support that through shared integration. And that's all wonderful if the relationship is safe. So if folks out there are doing psychedelics with a partner, either that isn't psychologically safe, or more likely that you're just not sure if that partner is psychologically safe, then I might really think about the value also of not only integrating with that partner, but doing your own integration separately and getting other inputs and feedback from other people so that you can really like keep your feet on the ground and assess like, is that how how this other person really is and what they really feel? Or is this a story that I'm making up in my mind and creating a false sense of safety that isn't there? I think people worry about that in MDMA experiences in particular, because that can create such a felt sense of safety and connection with another person that may not actually be there in your ordinary state of consciousness.
We have about 5 minutes. Kayla, are you able to see if there's any questions?
Yeah, no questions yet from
Okay.
the chat, so I think we can just keep chatting.
Cool. Tommaso, I'm curious how I know that you do your research with 5-MeO-DMT and you're in like lots of different areas. I'm curious what got you to relationships or what your interest is in relationships, because I don't think there's a lot of neuroscientists that choose to study relationships.
Yeah. Like I think like I've always been fascinated by love and connections, and I think like by like being fascinated by like mind altering experiences. I think this is one of the like most accessible potentially by humankind that we had like since like the beginning of times. And like love is a mind altering experience, and since like from my bachelor degree I wrote my bachelor thesis on like the similarities and differences between drug addiction and like romantic love on the brain, and that is a theme that like I slowly developed over time. And then like definitely like my personal experiences, both like from like the good but also like from the very bad that like came from mixing like love and psychedelics together. I think they inspired my research to work it to work it more and understand it, because it's severely unresearched, as we know, and I think there's a lot of good that can come from it, but also like if we don't understand it, we are like unconscious to like the potential like harms that can come. And I think like I've personally like experienced both of the sides of this in my life, and I think I came to like, I would say like not a complete understanding because it's never complete, but like I definitely like see the value in like researching the different aspects of it.
Same.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
I think people who, I mean, everyone who we talk to who has some experience with psychedelics, it is always in like lay audiences, it's always in some way connected to love and relationships. And I think this is one thing where Kayla and I are starting to do research through Enamory. And for everyone out there listening, finding ways to actually fund this research, as
Yeah.
Tommaso said, like this is very understudied because there isn't a lot of funding for love, which is crazy because it's something that we all experience and struggle with and are trying to figure out. So if there are people interested in love and psychedelics, please reach out to us because there's some really brilliant people who want to do this work who need support to do it.
What's next for you? What are your like next plans in the realm of like your research side, and what are you developing?
Are we allowed to talk about this, Kayla?
Sure. We have a couple. So we're trying to do too many things all at once, which is, I think, typical for Chandra and I. We are ambitious people, to put it mildly. But so we, as you know, we've got our trainings that we do. We train therapists in doing ketamine-assisted couple therapy, and then more broadly psychedelic-assisted couple therapy. We're beginning to explore moving into broadening that training, which we really want people to have an evidence-based grounding in how to apply psychedelics to like relational work, right? As you mentioned before, Tommaso, lots of people are doing this underground, and I think there's a lot of wisdom to be learned from the folks who have been practicing underground.
Yeah.
And also, we can add, I think, a lot of value to the conversation about teaching people what evidence-based couple therapy looks like and how to be really effective and safe in working with couples.
Yeah.
So that part of it is really exciting. Concurrently, we want to do more research on this model of ketamine-assisted couple therapy and really be able to present data on this is how it works, this is why it works, this is the couples that it works best for, here's how to use it most effectively. So we're beginning to build out a research program based in our clinic that can allow us to sort of speak to those questions with actual data. And then we're also exploring some ways of continuing the research on MDMA-assisted couple therapy and potentially also psilocybin-assisted couple therapy. That's a little bit of a newer kind of area for us to begin exploring. But Chandra and I both have some clinical experience working with psilocybin in other contexts. And then, of course, we work with wonderful colleagues like Anne Wagner on MDMA-assisted couple therapy. So we're working on running small clinical trials in all of those areas. But first, we have to get our research infrastructure set up at Enamory, which is not a small task.
Yeah, it was really interesting at ICPR, the interest that people had in psilocybin. Because obviously in the US, ketamine is what most therapists are using in their practices. And so there's a big interest in being able to do that work with couples.
Yeah.
But right in the Netherlands and more across Europe, people are using psilocybin. And so people are like, when are you going to be translating this model, adapting it for psilocybin? We're like, well, if y'all are interested, we'll do it.
Yeah, I think there's still so much. I mean, there's almost nothing to it. So like in every direction, like it's just a step of the puzzle that gets better developed.
That's right.
But it's gonna take a long time because yeah, it's not something. It's still a very niche in the psychedelic field, which is niche in psychiatry, and yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a really fun conversation. It's nice to connect with you.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure, girls.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.